welcome to Mutually Speaking by Navy Mutual. We are dedicated to educating military service members and their families on matters of financial security. The Navy Mutual Aid Association Mutually Speaking podcast is intended for general informational purposes only, as individual situations may vary. Statements made should not be relied upon as recommendations, solicitations, or construed as legal or tax advice. This podcast is not meant to replace the services of a licensed financial planner, insurance counselor, or tax advisor. Programs mentioned and other information referenced in this podcast may change from time to time. If you have questions or comments, or if there's a topic you'd like to learn more about on this podcast, contact us at podcast@navymutual.org. This season, we'll be focusing on retirement and long-term financial planning. Today's topic is retirement planning basics. Many service members and their families spend a lot of time working towards retirement and putting in their time, but not necessarily doing the long-term financial planning that'll make retirement easy. Today, we will go over basic goals to establish the financial life cycle and risk tolerance. Here today with us is retired Rear Admiral Brian Luther, who's the president and CEO of Navy Mutual. Thank you for joining us, Brian.
Kate, thanks for having me.
Let's get started by talking about the financial life cycle. Can you tell us what that is?
Sure. So a financial life cycle is the phases of financial planning that a person goes through in their life. I like to think of it as an arc, right? And it's got 3 phases in it. It's got a risk management, a wealth building, and a distribute wealth. And it works over time, and the demands that you face when you're younger vary when you're just starting out in your career and building your career, coming out of college, are different than as you get older in your career development and you perhaps get married, have a spouse, kids, buy a house. So there's different demands as you build your career and you build your wealth, and then you hit your power earning years, you're in your peak accumulation, and you have different demands. Maybe your kids are older and you want to pay for college, and you get through that phase, and then you're approaching retirement, and then you have, again, different debts, perhaps medical bills, and different things that you will need to start funding or plan for: Medicare, Medicaid, those kinds of things. Actually, just Medicare, Medicaid would be the thing you save for. So that's pretty much the financial life cycle. It's an arc from just getting started to your retirement.
Great. So in that first phase, that risk management phase, what are some things that you do to carry out risk management?
So in that phase, it's where you're guarding against uncertainty, and insurance plays a part of that. And, some insurance is mandated by law, right? So you can't drive a car without car insurance. If you buy a house, the bank will make you have homeowners insurance. If you buy a house, your real estate agent might want you to buy a home warranty, so your appliances are covered. Once you have something to protect, you want to start considering getting life insurance. On top of that, you should also work a couple of different funds. You should have a rainy day fund, and you should have an emergency fund. And a rainy day fund is something small. It's something that you can reach out, maybe a tire on your car if you had a pothole, a refrigerator, or an appliance. The emergency fund is something a little more significant, and it protects you for a longer period of time. So if your spouse gets unemployed, or if you get unemployed, and so ideally you want to have about 6 months of savings, so that would give you some time to readjust to the emergency, respond, and then get back on your feet without it turning into a financial crisis for you or your family.
Got it. So rainy day is like little things that might pop up, and emergency is like a true emergency.
A true emergency, yeah. It's a matter of scale, right? Rainy day is a day, but emergency could be an enduring issue that you have to resolve.
Right. So the financial phase that comes after the protection and risk management phase, that one is the building wealth.
Or accumulation, right? So as you once you get your job set, if you're in the military, right, you're accumulating retirement every year. You accumulate, a percentage of your pay as you build in your retirement. You get to invest in your TSP. If you're in the civilian world, the 401k typically is the vehicle, and so now you're working at your savings. And the key point about savings is it's not the amount that you save; it's the frequency with which you save. And if you can start in your early years frequently saving as you get pay raises and promotions, your savings rate will increase proportionally. And if you've got that frequency, that will help your building, right? So now you save a little bit into your rainy day fund and you fully fund that. And then you save a little bit into your emergency fund and you get that up to the 6 months. And then you're going into the TSP or your 401k because most companies or the government matches. So once you want to start accumulating wealth for your retirement, nothing better than getting free money. So if you put in 3.5% or 5%, and they match 5%, at a minimum, you should put in that amount of money that guarantees you the match because you're effectively doubling your rate of return with that free money. So you find these vehicles that will allow you to save. Once you max out your 401k, then you have an option of a Roth IRA or a traditional IRA, which is another vehicle. It's not as much money can go into those two, and they have different purposes. The traditional IRA, you get to deduct the amount you put into your IRA, and it grows tax deferred. For a Roth IRA, you pay taxes on the money you contribute. But when that comes out, it comes out tax-free. Your 401k, your TSP, or the traditional IRA, you put those in, get the tax deferred and tax deferred growth. But in the end, they come out and they are taxed.
Right. So you would want to allocate across taxed and tax deferred.
Right. You want to in your long-term financial plan, you want to have an understanding of where taxes are as a planning consideration and where you think you'll be in your retirement plan. But wherever you allocate, you want to have an understanding of what the consequence will be. So if you dedicate all your investments into TSP and you think you have $1 million in TSP, you're really looking at, depending on how much you pull out, a tax bill of 20% or as much as 25%, right? Because if you're going to sit there and say, I'm going to take $100,000 out of my TSP every year and I'm going to live on my Social Security, and you're getting $100,000 and $20,000, you're now in the 22-25% tax bracket. Then you think I'm going to be living on $120,000, but in reality, you're going to be living on closer to 90 because you're going to have federal tax and state tax depending on where you live. So if you sat there and said, I'm going to allocate some money that I can take out tax free, right, and I'm going to allocate some money that I'll grow tax deferred, and then I understand there'll be a taxable event when I pull it out, but you plan to it, right? So you want to manage your tax brackets in your retirement.
Or at least be prepared and understand what's coming.
Understand that when you look at an amount, you don't get that entire amount depending on the account. If you're looking at a Roth, you can pull all of that out and it would be yours tax-free. The other thing you have to consider is these accounts have required minimum distributions. So depending on when you start pulling money from it, the government has a set table, and the older you are, the more money they expect you to pull out of it, so that by the time you hit your actuarial life expectancy, you've pulled the bulk of the money out, right? They don't want you to be, they don't want to drive you into having no money left. Of course, it's still your money when you pull it out, but each year the requirement distribution gets greater and greater. So it's not like you can defer that. There will come a time at 72 right now that you will have to take required minimum distributions out of those accounts.
So with the Roth, though, there is no requirement.
Right, and there is no RMD, and there are no taxes when it comes out.
Gotcha. Okay, so with this middle phase, I would expect that and I'm probably wrong on this, but I would expect that a lot of service members are leaving the service during this time period.
Right. Yes. So typically, if you think about it, your early career, or you start out, you graduate college, and as a young adult, and you get established, so about 25. And then your first 10 years are where you're establishing yourself in your early career. And then your career development goes until about 50. And then hopefully you're in your power earning years in that 50 to 62, 65 timeframe. And a lot of people say, well, I'm going to work until I'm 70, and I'm going to work and maximize my Social Security. But life tends to happen. And about 10% of the people who say, I'm going to work all the way to 70 actually work until they're 70. So if you use as a planning factor 62, that's a more conservative planning factor. And every year that you work beyond 62 actually extends the duration and the amount of your retirement accounts, and that happens for two reasons. One, if you're planning at 62 and you say my life expectancy is going to be let's just say 87, you're saying I've got 25 years that my money has to last. But if you wait until 63, your money has a shorter period that has to last, and you had an extra year of tax deferred growth. So your funds got to grow another year, and they have to last a year less. So if you can make it to 67, now you have 5 years of funding that you get to spend over the next 20, and that's 5 years of growth, right? And
Right.
so in the rule of 72s is just a quick planning factor. The average rate of return for the stock market is 7 to 9%. So the rule of 72s is you divide your interest rate in 72, and that's how long it takes your money to double, right? So if we use 8% in between that 7 to 9, that would be 9 years. So if you could delay your retirement, close to 9 years, depending on the rate of return, that would actually allow your retirement nest egg to double if you were able to to let it go, right? So if you're at 62 and say, well, I'm gonna work for a little bit longer, even if you only went half that time, if you worked for another 5 years to age 67, you still got half again as much. You didn't double, but you got half again as much because you gave that more time to grow. And then if you had money in easily accessible savings, and you lived on your Social Security and you had some other passive income streams, then you could further delay until 70. Your Social Security will grow 8% until it maxes out at age 70, and the RMDs don't start until 72. So if you could hold off from when you retire in 62 to when you actually had to take it, you would clearly double anything that was in, assuming that the rate of return in the market matches.
Right. And assuming you maintain the will to work.
And you would, but even if you had different types of savings, right? What we talked about before. So if you said, I'm going to have some savings in this, I'm going to have some savings in that, and then when you decumulate, or when you've built up your wealth and when you want to distribute your wealth, if you have a strategy for that time, anything you keep in a tax deferred account for as long as possible is growing tax free. So the goal is to minimize your tax bill, right? So it's just a strategy, but time is on your side. It's the most critical component of a retirement plan, right? So start early, right? And save frequently, and then let time and compound interest be your friend. I think it's attributed to Einstein that it's the eighth wonder of the world, compound interest. So if you have that working for you over a longer period of time, it's nothing but goodness for you.
Right. And then it gives it time to readjust to. So, like example, 2008 happens again or something similar. You have time to recover, to recoup the losses.
Sure. And that's part of your strategy. Some people would refer to this as the bucket strategy. So, your smallest bucket would be, and most liquid would be your rainy day fund. So that might be in a passbook savings account that you could quickly transfer online against your credit card. You need a new tire, you buy the tire, you take it, you transfer it, and pay for the tire, and so your credit card bill doesn't go up appreciably. Then you have your emergency fund, and so like we saw with the pandemic, companies have to respond. Some services, some companies are closed through no fault of their own, and so people are looking for a job, and so it takes some period of time before we get reestablished. So the market went last March, in March of 2020, around March 16th, about a year ago from when we're talking today, it was at the bottom, right, for the last few years. And, a year later, it's setting a record, for a high. So that is a bit unusual to go from a current high to, 50-year low and then come back and set a new high. If you take a look at the duration of the stock market, typically it's 4 to 5 years. So for recovery for where it was in 2008, it was about 5 years. So if you were selling in 2008, right, to lock in your money so that you weren't putting at risk, what in fact you were doing was locking in your losses. So if you had another bucket after your emergency phase, emergency funds that perhaps was in bonds or something, a little more liquid, that could cover your income needs over the period of time, it would allow you to let your stocks recover, and you wouldn't want to touch that. So in your strategic plan for your estate or your retirement, you would say, I'm going to put a portion of my money in stocks, and that's where I'm going to get my greatest rate of return. But I'm not ever going to need that for 5 or 10 years.
Right.
And then I'm going to create something that's a bit more safe, perhaps a little bit less liquid, bonds or something, that even if interest rates go up or down a lot, right, I might lose 20% of the value of the bonds, but in doing that, my interest rate would go up, and so I would get more off of the next series of bonds as that money rolls over. And then you would have some money that's in cash, right? And you have your emergency fund. But if you had the ability to layer that income from your investments, that would give you some protection. And you work this in congruently or concurrently with passive income streams. So your Social Security would be a passive income stream. Your military retirement would be a passive income stream. So if you can understand what your retirement costs are, you say, I'm going to get this much from my military retirement, and I'm going to wait and maximize my Social Security, and I'm going to lay on my Social Security, and then I'm going to draw down on these bonds until I get to this point where I'm forced to take R&Ds. Then I take distributions from this account, and then I'll hold this account. And then I'll force that down, and perhaps I keep my Roth as the last thing I pull down, and then to give that the maximum time. But then I know at that point that everything that comes in is tax-free. Or you may say, I have too many of these different accounts, and taking RMDs from an IRA and from a 401k is creating rising into another tax bracket. So maybe you say, I'll take a little off my Roth and then continue the tax deferred growth in the other and avoid the tax bite. So
that's smart.
It's a juggle. It's and there are people, certified financial planners and retirement counselors, retired income stream counselors, that will work all this through, right? Take a look and figure out the balance of when to your allocation, your asset allocation for whatever risk you're willing to take, and then balance the withdrawal rate to minimize your taxes and maximize the amount of money you have for your retirement. Which is the goal, right? So you can have fun in your retirement.
Yes, and not thinking about numbers all the time. Yeah. No, it is important, though. I guess, too, a question I had is, what would be your advice to, a young service member who's starting to think about retirement planning, or in particular is not thinking about it? And just something that comes into my mind every time someone brings up TSP, I sort of get a little twinge in my heart, because my husband, when he joined up in the Navy, he opted out of TSP because he wanted his full paycheck all the time, and he was 19 and he didn't care.
Right.
And he's going to live forever, right?
That's right. When you're 19, you are going to live forever. You leap tall buildings in a single bound, right? You catch speeding bullets.
Yep.
Right, and that's interesting. It is an intellectual exercise to, when you're living today, think about how your actions will impact future you,
Right.
right? And I'm quite sure future you, if they were standing next to you, would say, you don't need that, right? What you need is to put more money into your retirement. But this is the point made earlier, right? It's never too early to start, right? And when you start, it's not the amount you start with, it's the frequency you start with. Because as your career progresses, normally, as you get more senior or as time goes on, your pay will increase,
Right.
at least in the military, and when you're associated with the military, and most companies, right, where there's a market evaluation or market assessment or an inflation adjustment, and your pay will go up. So, what was recommended for military people and even some civilians, when you get a pay raise, you take a portion of your pay raise and you put it into your retirement account, into your 401k. If you get a promotion and there's a corresponding pay raise, you take that as well, right?
So you're living off of the same means that you were before.
Well, so like for the military, if you, let's say it's a really good year and you got a 2% cost of living increase and a pay raise, and in that same year you got a promotion and your promotion gave you a 4% pay raise, so you're looking at a 6% pay raise overall for the year. So if in January you get your cost of living increase and it's 2%, you just add 1% into TSP.
Right.
You got a 1% pay raise. Right. So you're getting more money in your pocket every day, right? But you're putting 1% in. And this is the point about, it's the frequency with which you save. So if every year you get a cost of living increase and you put half of it into your TSP and half of it goes to you, eventually you're going to get to the point where you're maxing out the percentage that is allowable on TSP. But you've maxed out your TSP contribution without ever taking a pay cut.
Okay.
Right? If you get a 4% promotion and you put 2% into TSP and you put 2% into your pocket, you got a pay raise, and TSP got a pay raise. And so future you is thanking you, right? And you're starting early, and so you're giving that money time to grow. So if you're a 19-year-old and you're putting money in and you're going to retire at 69, let's just say, so it's easy math, that money had 50 years, right? And if we talked about that rule of 72s, and again, this is all just historical averages, right? But if your money doubled every decade, $1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 to 32. So every dollar he put in as a 19-year-old would be 32 when he was retiring. Future you would thank you tremendously, for that. But that's what I was saying. Time is your best friend, compound interest. So it's never too early to start, right? And the other thing that happens too is bonuses come, right? So you get a re-enlistment bonus, anything along the lines. Officers, get bonuses depending on their platform. Nuke power gets a bonus, or aviators would get bonus. So any kind of retention bonus that you had, and putting that into a fund, right? And that would jumpstart and allow you to max out a year, right? And again, if you take half your bonus and you put it, and the benefit of that is if you take half your bonus and put it in your 401k, that half is not taxed, right? Stuff you put into a TSP or 401k is not taxed. So, or if you got it taxed, then you put it in your Roth IRA and let it grow for you. But it's every opportunity that you have that you can put a little bit in, it will grow for you. So it's never too early to start. It starts with a plan, right? And I, in some of the talks I give, I'll tell them there are no one mow lawns, right? So anyone who has a house knows that every week you have to mow the lawn. And anyone with teenage boys will tell you that they tell you you don't need to mow the lawn because the grass is just going to come back again, right?
It's fine, just leave it.
So it's just wasted effort, right? But the thing is, you anything that you have to nurture. If it's a garden or a yard, or if it's a plan, you have to review the plan. Eisenhower said famously, it's not the plan, it's the planning, right? So as things change in life, if you know how to plan, you can adjust your plan and adjust your plan to whatever the circumstances are. So you have to be, if you said, well, I'm not going to get married until I'm in my 30s, and Thunderbolt City comes and you find yourself married in your 20s, and we're not going to have kids, and then you have triplets, right? Life happens, and
you have to adjust.
And you have to adjust your plan, right? And oh, I had triplet girls, and so now there's weddings I want to plan for, or there's 3 colleges that I want to help my kids with, and so your plan is always needs to be assessed, right? So that you can figure out, and it may also work on expectation management, right? So I can't afford to pay for 3 colleges, right?
Right.
And so study hard, kids, right?
Yeah, it's better to know beforehand.
Sure. And or it may have you look in different places, right? So some states used to have that. Virginia just closed theirs, but I think they're going to reopen it. But there was early college tuition plans, right?
A lot of states like 529s.
Well, there's 529s that you can do, but prepaid tuition. So personal story. I offered to pay. I lived in Florida. My goddaughter was up in New England. I offered to buy a prepaid college tuition for my goddaughter in Florida, which at the time, this was last millennium, was $5,000.
Wow.
So my sister-in-law, who has since profusely apologized and says, I don't know what I was thinking, rebuffed the offer.
Oh, wow.
At the time, didn't know much about, they were freshly married. It was their second child. Here's Uncle Brian saying, I'll pay for college in Florida. They don't know anything about the state of Florida. And the thank you, but we'll work our family plan, right? But for $5,000, I could have sent my goddaughter to school in Florida for 4 years, right? So fast forward to niece going to college, and sister-in-law's like, what was I thinking? Oh my God, I'm sorry, right?
Yeah, I bet it's 6 figures now.
Yeah, I wish I had a Wayback Machine and I could go way back and say, yes, thank you, right? And how about Justin too? You can buy one for him. So, but those are things that you would take a look at, and so maybe you lose the dream of sending your kid to Harvard, and you say, hey, my state has good state schools and prepaid tuition. But that gives you a planning factor to go to. And they have options to say, if you don't use this state, you can apply the funds. And to your point, there's also the 529 fund, right? So there's lots of demands on your paycheck, right? So the future competes with the present, right? So if I save now for college, it'll be a smaller bill in the future, but I think I kind of need a new car now, or I would like a bigger house now, or I need this, or. So the other challenge to live by, rule to live by, is to spend less than you make. Right.
It sounds simple, but
it's
not always easy to execute.
And with everything that's on the marketing and advertising, that you need that new phone every year, and you need that new car every other year, and you need. And but if you understand what your long-term goals are, and you understand how you're tracking to your goals, maybe that makes it easier to hold on to the phone one year longer and save that $1,000 and put it into your fund, or half into the 529 and half into this, right? Or so an economist will always, when asked how is something, they'll always say, compared to what. right? And so if you are only living in the now, you have nothing to compare your expense with. Right. So if you have a plan and you understand where you want to go in the future, it helps to provide that context, that compared to what, right? So there are people, there's a movement that financially financially independent, retire early. And that's how, if you follow their methodology, that's the first step. Spend less than you make, right? Gotcha. And it's a ruthless controlling of your expenses. And they figure out that actually you can live on a lot less than you think. And once you control your expenses, well, then it becomes progressively easier to save, right? And they will buy a smaller house rather than a larger house, right? Something that's good enough. And then once they pay that house off, they'll bootstrap themselves into a second house. And then it builds. And then it builds. But somebody's going to take your money, and you can either spend it on yourself, right? Or you can spend it on your future. And those are the choices we make.
Oh, gosh. Choices every day. So that brings us then to our distribution phase.
Okay. And I think we kind of talked about the distribution phase on how you set up your allocation. Right. After time, probably the next critical factor is your asset distribution, right? So, and part of that asset distribution is your risk tolerance. So as you're working to accumulate, if you just went through the last year and you said, in February, I really like where I am and I can retire anytime I want, and then a month later we're at the bottom, and you saw a 40% reduction in your retirement savings, that may make you risk adverse, right? So if we had done the bucket strategy and you had some money that tided you over and you didn't need to use your stocks, right, you would have had the ability to wait out the market and let it go up, and then you would have found yourself not only as good for your retirement, but in fact even better a year later, right? So, but depending on what your timeline is on your plan, and we mentioned the rule of 72s earlier, right? The average is 7 to 9%. Well, the last couple of years, at the end of the Trump presidency, we were, depending on your asset allocation, 20 to 30%.
Oh, wow.
So, and that is an anomaly, right? That kind of rate of growth, right?
You shouldn't
plan for it, right? But if you were coming of age at the end of the Trump presidency and you saw these double digits, you're saying, well, geez, at 30%, every 2 years, I'm going to double my money. At this point, I'm going to retire in a decade and be living like a king, right?
Living the dream.
Or you could say, after you watch the market crash in 2005, you say, I think I'm going to be a little more conservative. But the more conservative you are, the lower your rate of return, right? So you can get a rate of return by liquidity, right? The more liquid you make it, the less money you'll make, right? Because people are trying to use that money to invest to make money. So if you make it less liquid, you'll get more money, a higher rate of return. If you lock it up for a longer period of time, if you have duration, you can increase your rate of return by saying and that's why typically CDs, right, have a higher rate of return the longer that you lock your money up, right, and a higher penalty than for doing it. And then the last thing is risk, right? So you could have said, hey, this electric car maker that I'm hearing about, this sounds pretty cool. And I think electric cars are the future. And so you could have bought Tesla at the beginning, right? When it was just a dream in Elon Musk's glimmer in his eye, right? And then it was probably 18 months ago, 2 years ago, maybe. At some point, I remember hearing an article that if the Tesla stock did not hit 300, a good number of his bonds were going to get called, and it was going to raise the cost of capital for Tesla, and it would be a challenge for Tesla, right? So, in just a short, just a couple years ago, just a short period of time in the lifespan of a company, people were wondering if Tesla was going to make it to $300 a share at this time frame, right?
That's a high bar.
They did make it, and they never looked back. Today, Tesla's at 680. It's very volatile, but that's after a 5-to-1 split, right? So if you had bought shares of Tesla when they were at $240, wondering, right, or say 250, your cost per share on Tesla would be $50 a share because you got a 5-to-1 split, and it's today close to $700. So that's quite a rate of return. Perhaps in an alternate universe, he didn't make the $300 share. His cost of capital went up, and
the share price
dropped. And there are countless stories of companies that come in, burn very bright, have big IPOs, the price goes up, right? And so that's the risk. You buy, you put your money down, and you take your chances. So conversely, those are growth companies. If you put your money in Apple's been very, very good to you. Google's been very, very good to you, as has Facebook. There are other companies that on the technology side that have not been very good. Now that's growth. There's also value stocks. They don't. They provide income. They can have dividends associated with them, right? So you have not as turgid a growth, right? Not as rapid a growth, but so the rate of return is less because your risk is less,
right?
But it's a more consistent growth. And when they provide dividends, so not only do you have the option to grow the value of your stock, but a well-run value company is going to be providing a 2% or 3% or 4% dividend, which is more than you would get in a passbook savings. So now you can sit there and say, well, if I need to retire in a couple years, I need to find the next Tesla. And so money will chase these companies, hoping to make some fast money so they can get on their plan and retire early, or something. Or there's slow money, which is this
steady building.
Yep, could be the tortoise and the hare, right?
Yeah.
Slow and steady wins the race. So you have less volatility, you have less risk, but you have less stories to tell at the cocktail party about how good your stocks are doing, right? Because nobody's really interested in hearing how your dividend went on a utility stock. Everybody wants to brag on.
I feel like you're calling me out right now with my income stocks.
It's all about, the thing about personal finance is that it's personal, right? And so, one of the things that you should consider, all these things are tools, right, that allow you to accomplish what you want. And I think one of the things that money is for is to bring you peace of mind. And if you're going to invest in the stock market and just get an ulcer because you worry all the time about what your money is doing, then you shouldn't be investing in it because it grants you no peace of mind, right? If you like the risk and you like gambling and you like that, then you can don't do your due diligence, go on a Reddit page, find a recommendation and buy a stock and hope that when the music stops, you got a chair, right? But if you want to go slow and steady and you have a plan and you don't need 30% a year to achieve your plan, then you can take a little less volatility into your portfolio. You don't have to assume that risk, and you can say, I'm going to buy Procter and Gamble and sell household goods and have a very consistent rate of return and a very small,
CVS
but CVS, right? Because I know people are going to go to the corner store and get a soda, a bag of chips, and pick up their prescriptions. Absolutely, right? Syntax companies, Philip Morris breweries, always, people are always going for those things, and so they're pretty consistent. They've weathered many storms as well. So as you work your accumulation, one of the things you have to do is figure out your asset allocation, and then what risk you're willing to take. So that risk tolerance is a personal thing. You don't want to be that TSP millionaire who was risking it all on small cap stocks, right? that did horrible, and then in this last year they've been on fuego, right?
Right.
They've been growing. So who can plan to that? Well, some people risk not. I forget the phrase, but the rewards go to those who risk it all, right? So
Right.
it's a personal philosophy, right? So I kind of do a mixed asset. My wife's asset philosophy is I want my money to be there. So she has a
Yeah.
very low risk tolerance. So somewhat just above the mattress fund of savings, right? Right. So, but the other thing is there are thumb rules out there. So there's an allocation between bonds and stocks, right?
Okay.
So as many years of age as you are, that's how much percentage of your portfolio should be in bonds.
Okay.
Now, as longevity increases, that rule of thumb is being modified, right? Because you
Sure.
need that rate of return that a stock market provides, so that the funds, as longevity increases, you don't want to run out of money before you run out of life, right?
Right. Wow. So it's personal finance is personal. It sounds like when you're planning for your retirement, it really needs to be about your family, your situation, what you're looking at.
Right.
Because, your family with one kid is looking at a different retirement situation with empty nesting than a family of five
kids, right? Yeah.
whose kid is in high school when they're
Sure.
retiring
Yep.
or something
And
like that.
even inside a family, I have 3 kids, so my brother has 6, right?
Right.
And so he's like, well, feel free to help me out whenever you're done with your 3, right? So, but the other thing is where do you want to retire? What do you want to do when you retire? Is what you want to do the same thing that your spouse wants to do? Is the location the same place that your spouse wants to retire, right? So, if your desire is to retire in a penthouse in New York City, that has a different cost structure than
Right.
I think I'd like a little more rural environment where I can have peace and quiet, right?
Sure. Or my mom wants to stay in the house until she dies, and my dad's like,
Right.
"Oh, good Lord, can we please move to a
Right.
beach?"
Yeah. Right. So retire in place. So maybe you retire in place in near a beach, right?
Mhm.
But yes.
Cool. So I think we touched on this a little bit, like retirement mistakes. We talked about, not starting a TSP, or what would you do if you're leaving the service and you've got your TSP, but you're not retiring. You're just separating. So like my husband did 8 years and he left. What would you consider? What, what would be your advice for retirement planning if you're just separating?
Right. Well, if you haven't started,
Mm-hmm.
start. I would start with starting a plan. Then the other thing I would say is understanding when you do start. So one of the nice things about TSP is it's got a phenomenally low fee structure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now there are other funds out there that want to compete with TSP, but as you leave, you have to understand that the benefits that the military provided you, and which ones do you want to take advantage of, which ones do you want to keep,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you don't have to get rid of your TSP when you leave.
Right.
You can't add anything more to it, but the TSP as a vehicle remains. So you can keep your funds in the TSP. So as you leave the service, you should take a stock of those benefits that you have. Survivor benefit plan is, that's if you retired, right? So if you retired, you have that as an option. Whatever you put in your TSP, that's an option. And then whatever insurance or VA benefits that you have. So you would roll all those things into your plan. And then again, it would be the same thing, same considerations that you had in the earlier part of your financial life cycle, only now you're starting a new career and then you're in the beginning of the career, and then your company is going to have benefits or
like
programs. Yeah.
Okay.
So if a company or if it's a for-profit company, they'll have an employee stock option, right? So you can you can invest in the company. So you would have to take or conduct an assessment of the benefits that your company has, and then look at your overall plan, and then integrate the beneficial offerings from your new company, right? And then just kind of work an assessment like that.
Great. Right. So let's talk about key takeaways. What would we talked about a lot today. We covered a lot of information.
Right.
But if the person listening were only to catch these last 5 minutes or so, what would be sort of like the top 3 to 5 things that you would want them to take away from this talk?
The key takeaways I would start with would be the savings, right? It's not the amount, it's the frequency of your savings. So and that needs you to start. Right. So it's never too early to start. Start small, but get the habit established. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Save according to a goal. There's a book I read years ago, and it was a personal coach type of book. But one of the things, the key takeaways in his book was writing down a plan increases the chance of accomplishing that plan by 85%.
Oh, wow.
Right. So if you take your vision of where you want to go, and then as we mentioned earlier, life changes, right? Mm-hmm. So create that plan. And then just by writing that plan down, you're bounding your problem. You're setting challenges. You're setting goals for yourself, whether you know it or not, to say, hey, this is what I want to accomplish. I can tell you that when I was 21, my vision was to buy a lake house, retire at the lake house, and have it be at a lake that was large enough for me to land my seaplane on so that I could leave work, fly to my lake, land my plane on the lake, and drive it up to my dock and moor it, and then walk into my house. And that was going to be my weekend. And then life happened, right? And so that wasn't my wife's plan, but the compromise was no plane, a lake view house, right? Mm-hmm. That we drive to.
That's not a bad compromise.
It's not a bad compromise. It's just a lot right now. It's no house, right? But we're taking the baby steps, right? So the plan changed, right? And we're still progressing towards the goal, right? But if I didn't know what the goal was, I wouldn't know what to save to. I wouldn't know what my considerations would be. I wouldn't have that conversation with my wife, right? To say, where do you want to have a place potentially to retire to? And so if I'm in the mountains and she's on the beach, right, there's a heck of a commute between the two of us, right? So you start your plan, you start early, you have a plan, you save frequently. And then you understand that the best key to accomplishing your plan is to spend less than you make, right? So you always have some excess that you can contribute to the goal.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Retirement planning doesn't age well. The longer it gets put off, the fewer options you have. People tend to shy away from these kinds of topics. There's a general fear within our culture of getting old, but putting it off just delays the inevitable. Start the conversation with your partner now. Start with basic achievable goals and add to your planning and savings as you are able. Financial planners are great resources. If you're an active duty military, you have access to free financial planning through the DoD Office of Financial Readiness. Civilians don't have many, if any, free options outside of the internet, so take advantage while you're still in the service. Thank you all for listening, and thank you to our guest, Rear Admiral Brian Luther. Join us for our next episode when we will be discussing investment basics. Visit info.navymutual.org/mutually speaking to access resources and information related to today's topic, or submit a question to podcast@navymutual.org.